Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special chat with Dan the Stork Roddick. My hunch is that many players today may not realize the incredible impact that he's had on flying disc sports for 50 years. And I'm also hoping that this video will not get lost on the internet and that it'll be preserved for future generations to see the incredible history that he's brought to the games. So Dan, thank you very much for your time to be here to create this small deposit for the archives.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I have to admit, peeved is too harsh a word, maybe disappointed, but they started this great series with Kirkland. I mean, why not Victor or me? I mean, the guy's, he's a relative latecomer. I mean, he's a three-digit PDGA number. I mean, you know, kind of what's with that? I mean,
So am I.
are you a NASCAR fan?
No.
Well, everybody else in the world is. Driver number 3 is Dale frickin' Earnhardt. 3. Who's driver 100? Exactly.
No.
So Kirkland would tell you, if you ask him about the number, he'd say, "Oh, I asked Ed, man. I asked for 100. I could have had a better number." That didn't happen. I mean, he tells that. And fact is, his brand has not aged well. Before Juliana was born, if you ask a Frisbee player who's JK, they'd have said Kirkland. Not now. It's Juliana. So, I mean, I'm just saying. No, actually, I love the interview. I actually learned some things, which was amazing.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I have a drinking game that I play when John's interviewed, where I take a drink every time he says humdrummery, which is my favorite word that he invented.
Well, in order to free up time for your humor later, I'm going to quickly summarize what I know about your amazing life in disc sports. So bear with me here. You started playing with Dad, an astronomy professor, in the backyard in 1958 with a Pipco flying saucer. So this is where we're talking about 60 years here. Though you didn't call it disc golf, it was. Now, you helped run the Penn State Championships from 1966 to 1970, got you into Frisbee tournaments and how to do that. And then you led the Millersville College Club to set a Frisbee marathon world record, playing nonstop for 11 weeks. You go to grad school at Rutgers, where you meet Irv Kalb, who's shown in the picture there on the Foothill Ultimate team beside you. And he became also a legendary player. Now, you became the MVP in the big game against Princeton, and you snagged the nickname Stork for plucking goals out of the air 10 feet high. You went to your first international Frisbee tournament in 1973. That's the big tournament that was going on since '58. And then you took that energy back to Rutgers and you started publishing Flying Disc World magazine and organized the first octad tournament in 1974 with Gary Subert and Flash Eberly. Octad consisted of 8 events and the overall. And then that summer, Jim Palmieri ran the first American Flying Disc Open in Rochester, and Stork wins golf by 13 throws and the overall, and you won a new car. The sport is taking off. So then Ed Hedrick at Whammo contacts you and Irv for advice about who to invite to the 74 World Frisbee Championships in the Rose Bowl. That first WFC had only 2 events, if I'm not mistaken. It was distance and the IFA World Class Master Test. And then Ed asked you to move to LA and run the International Frisbee Association. And there you spearheaded Frisbee World magazine, the North American Series tournaments leading up to the WFC, the state championships all over the United States. You served as the competition director for the WFC from 1975 to 1982. And by the way, adding to your golf and your overall and your ultimate prowess, you won the 1975 World Freestyle Championship with Irv Kalb. You left, Ed left Whammo, but you stayed on, as I understand it. And then in 1982, Kransco bought Whammo, which was a big event. And Stork adroitly stayed on again to morph the WFC into the US Open from 1983 to 1990. And we're going to talk more about that. Now, throughout the early 80s, you walked kind of a thin line between the Whammo executives who wanted to promote only their brand and many players who wanted the competitions to be open to all the brand of discs. Then you helped guide the initial enthusiasts in the birth of the Ultimate Players Association, the Professional Disc Golf Association, the Freestyle Players Association, and the World Flying Disc Federation. And to this day, you still play a volunteer role with all of those, if I understand right. Not to mention, back in the 80s, the Hacky Sack and Frisbee festivals, the World Junior Frisbee Championships, and helping to get flying disc into physical education classes all over the country. And finally, let's not overlook your trips to Sweden and Japan to help grow the Frisbee family internationally. Dan, are there any other major works in this Da Vinci career that I've left out?
I actually remember almost nothing of what you've said. Is that, have you verified all of that?
Well, that's going to impair the interview a little bit. Can you try to snap to it here?
Wow, man, almost all of that seems like it was true. My ongoing work with the associations over the last, I don't know, since '99, I guess, has been primarily with PDGA. I am a paid consultant to the board at PDGA. The other roles are volunteer roles.
So let's go back to kind of in chronological order. 1966 at Millersville State College, 7 years before you go to the International Frisbee Tournament. And, what led you to run the Pennsylvania State Championships?
I think that the taste for multi-event competitions came from working with my dad, Jack, who was track and field coach and football coach at Shippensburg. And so particularly the track and field was really, really appealed to me. And so I liked the idea of how adaptable the Frisbee was to the different activities. So it just seemed like a natural thing to have those competitions come together in kind of a Grand Prix format and see, well, how well can you trick catch? How far can you throw? How accurately can you throw? And a lot of other people seem to be interested in it too. So it was a natural. That's
pretty cool. Now, when you got to Rutgers, were you boys in 1974 concerned that a weekend tournament with 8 events would be too ambitious?
Well, we weren't sure. I'm not sure how Gary and I don't remember truly. I guess I think Flash was there by then as well, Kingsley. I don't know how we came up with 8. Maybe we had octad first and then said, well, we need 8 events. We just like the word. Because the add-on event, I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who knows all 8 events, but the event that got us to 8 was trick throw accuracy. So accuracy and then trick throw accuracy. And that brought us to 8. Well, we only had, as I recall, I think it was 26 entrants in the first octad, which is interesting because when we get to the end of the interview, the U.S. Open staffs were bigger than that.
Right. Nice.
And so with only 26 entrants, we felt we had the latitude to experiment a bit because the events all ran pretty quickly. And we didn't know. It was uncharted territory. So we figured we could get away with it, and we did.
Wow. Well, that overall tradition has stayed on has lasted a long time. Now, John Kirkland mentioned how narrowly you edged him out for that overall at the American Flying Disc Open in 1974. But I'm pretty sure you were elated to win golf by 13 strokes. And mom and dad must have been in disbelief when you drove home in a new car.
I was in disbelief as well, to the extent while I had prepared really in a very dedicated way, probably more dedicated preparation than I've ever made for a golf event. Prepared for that, I I didn't think I was going to win. I had bought, my wife and I had bought a brand new Mustang just weeks before the event. So that's hardly a show of great confidence. On the other hand, as we drove up there, Gary Subert multiple times, because we were all packed into to one car, and he said, "Oh, there'll be plenty of room on the way back." You know, and we all laughed, you know, because it was unknown territory. And when you're coming in there and you're facing Victor and John Connolly and Bruce Koger and Doug Maria and all these people who were, you know, very experienced players, and frankly, in retrospect, you know, just between us, all better athletes than I was. I mean, when you look at the athletic achievements of these other folks, both before and after, the odds weren't good. But there were a number of things that that added up to that surprising margin. One was, I think I had more ball experience than the others in terms of course management. I mean, Victor throwing behind the back approach shots. You know, I mean, he had so many tools in his toolkit. I only had one tool. You know, I had that one PPI disc and a backhand. That was it. And so in terms of simplicity, it was a lot simpler. And I had a really effective long distance vertical putt that came in these boxes, came down really, didn't go in. It went in many times. If it didn't, it was close. And if it was close, then I had my signature falling putt where I would stork it in, you know, fall on my face and dunk it, because you couldn't touch the ground in front of your line before you released. And at the end of that, with completely muddied up, I said to Palmieri, well, we need a falling putt rule. We don't want to do this for the rest of our.
So that's where that came from. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Yeah. Now, I'm guessing, let's see, right after that was the 1974 WFC in the Rose Bowl, and I think that's probably where you started forming a special connection with Ed Hedrick. Is that when you two hatched the idea for you to come out to the IFA and mushroom its impact with Frisbee World and the North American Series and the 50 state meets?
You know, I can't remember how much discussion we had in 74. I mean, I had known Ed for quite a while, and he was certainly aware of the 74 AFDO, and I do think that that's probably when we first started talking about it. I saw recently in Victor Malafronte's book that recounts a lot of the really early days that the Northern California players had discussions with Ed also about the leadership of the IFA, which I hadn't known before, and that I think Victor in particular had suggested that I might be a good choice. So, which was gracious of him, because he probably could have had the job for himself if he wished. And then I think Ed probably was moved or scared by the Flying Disc magazine that was beginning to have reach and was doing organizational things that IFA News had not been doing. That IFA News was more of a strictly promotional promotional publication that didn't have much news and really was basically focused on IFT and not much more. So I think Ed kind of saw the future there and had aspirations that were a good fit with what we were doing in our amateurish kind of way at Rutgers.
Cool. Now, what was it like when you moved out to LA, you started working at the IFA, and you get on the phone with the Frisbee Club presidents all over the country to tell them that you want to send them 100 world-class Frisbees and tape measures and trophies to help them run state championships?
You know, that was one of the things that was great about it at the beginning and continued, is that I always was in the really fortunate position of working with friends. And so I already had a lot of contacts, and that was one of the big things I guess that I brought to the job is that I had a lot of Eastern contacts, and then came out to the West and developed those there. But things really fell together in a very easy fashion, because the leaders of the various factions were all friends already. So it wasn't hard to talk to, Larry Dell and Tom Kennedy, and when you're talking about Ultimate, and even though I wasn't a guts player of any note ever, I knew the guts players and their leaders in particular. I knew the freestyle people, obviously, and the field event players. So all of that kind of fell together. And because not much had been done on a national basis, all those phone calls were great news. And people were saying, really, that sounds great. Sign me up. So it was hardly selling world books. I mean, it was, hey, we want to do something together, and we've got some money behind it finally.
Now, did you realize the impact that Frisbee World magazine was having on growing the sport? I started getting the magazine in late 1976, and it was addictive.
Well, it was definitely the bully pulpit, and of course I was feeling very blessed, because we had been running Flying Disc World off of the mimeograph machine, duplicating office at Rutgers Mental Health Center late at night. They were loose with the key, so it was a very low budget in doing that magazine. So to have an art department and slick publication,
photographs,
yeah, and a staff. I mean, I walked in there, and there's Joe Cahow, and who could actually type and write and do a lot of things that made the thing go, and was able to build staff pretty quickly. That it was a tremendous opportunity, one that I hope we fulfilled in a productive way. When I look back over the magazines, which ironically is multiple times a week. I mean, it's amazing to me how much of my life now is, somebody on Facebook or something saying, yeah, well, how many people qualified at the 1982 thing in Manassas? And I'm going, I don't know. But I have to pull that magazine, which has the detail, which I remember not at all. And it says, 25, unless they had already qualified. And so I'm pulling that magazine maybe 5 times a week on average. So it's been pretty interesting.
All right. Well, tell us about the growth of the World Frisbee Championships from 1974 to the last one in 1982, which was held at Rutgers after UC Irvine kind of forced you to scramble for a new venue at the last minute.
Okay, so you want me to describe the growth of WFC from 74 to 82? What have I got, like 3 minutes or?
No, go wherever you want to take it.
Okay, well, Ed's image of it was very much based on proficiency ratings. That is, the 74 championship, the overall championship, was based on the throwing circles, mm-hmm. and the sort of format that you use to qualify for master and then world-class master, mm-hmm. Showing competency in different deliveries, different catches, although there wasn't that much on catching, but different deliveries, different flight paths, skip shots, etc. And so that was the core of the initial WFC. When I took it over, which was somewhat related, of course, to Ed's departure. I mean, if he had stayed on, I'm sure I'd have had a tighter leash on what I could do. But when Ed left and I said, hey, you want me to go with you? I mean, I don't want to say or undercut you. I'll go back to grad school. He said, nah, you might as well stay, which he probably regretted a few times after that. But then I had carte blanche, man. I was the Frisbee guy. And so I was able to, get regional directors in place and the player associations and run with the magazine and remold the WFC into essentially octad with gas in the tank. And so that was the opportunity to begin to introduce the events and really make the idea of disc sports as a, let's say the analogy would be the decathlon or the heptathlon in track and field, where we looked at your performance in a number of different disciplines and then put that all together and said, well, that makes you the overall best player in the sport. And I think people responded to that in a positive way. It wasn't ideal for every player in that they weren't necessarily good in all of the disciplines, and all of the disciplines didn't necessarily appeal to them. But one thing to remember is that back in that era, almost everybody played some of everything. Mm-hmm. That is, other than probably the most parochial of the elements was guts, because they in the beginning had been kind of geographically isolated, and I can remember them describing the other activities as monkeying around. Oh, I saw those guys were monkeying around over there with the Frisbee. Well, that's called freestyle. Right. Oh, okay. They weren't throwing fast at all. I could have caught any of those. No, you don't understand. It's like they're working together. Huh? What? I don't get it. Exactly. They're working together. And then on the other hand, there's somebody like Irv Kalb, born in the Maplewood Ultimate tradition. I can remember Irv so clearly saying, I don't get guts. I mean, Frisbee's all about your partner catching the disc. I mean, why would you throw it so hard that they can't catch it? I don't get it. And of course, Irv eventually became a World Cup champion. So he got over his initial but so having these multiple events was an interesting challenge for people. There were folks who specialized, obviously, and were much better in some events than others, and that's understandable. I mean, when you looked at the array of people who were in the events, the big challenge to me actually through those years was to try to create qualifying systems that allowed these overall players like yourself, allowed them to qualify because of their strength across the disciplines, but also allowed someone, like a Joey Hodocklin or a Jeff Elberbaum or someone like that, who didn't necessarily do a lot of other events. You wanted them in there because you wanted to show the best of those events. You weren't that concerned about a distance thrower. You figured you're going to get Joe Youngman because he's going to do pretty well at self-caught flight, and he's going to do great at distance and the various field events. Yeah, he'll be able to qualify. But it was an ongoing challenge to try to strike that balance where you got it and you didn't look at an event, you didn't look at freestyle and go, that went cheap because X wasn't here. And so that was the biggest challenge. The fun of it for me as a game designer and event producer and event production really was such a satisfying thing. I was speaking to someone earlier this week about, I think it was mainly the US Opens I was talking about, but WFC is the same, is that the satisfaction of creating that experience for people. I mean, at the height of the WFCs, those were unbelievable events. I mean, there was 20 hours of programming at every day. I mean, it wasn't just the competition.
Mm-hmm.
The evening was fully programmed too. I mean, there was this collectors conference over here and a discussion on disc golf course design over here and a mini golf competition over here, and everybody did everything, but all of that was staffing and time. And then each morning on your table, there's the WFC review with yesterday's activities. I mean, it was a big, big operation, and pulling those off, which only could have been done with the cooperation of players to participate, obviously, and the staff who were just wonderful. I mean, it just couldn't have been done. I mean, I said there was money in it, but there never could be enough money to pay people to do the kinds of things that they did. I mean, I don't think for that WFC review, I don't think Joe and Mark Dana slept for the whole week. You know, they're out there putting those things together. And so that was just tremendous fun from the game design standpoint, which is one of my favorite parts of the sport. I mean, I like tennis too, but they're not sitting over there at the tennis association going, I wonder how we could tweak it. You know, is there any way we could make it more fun? What if there were 3 players in each, you know, it's done. It's done. They have it, you know, but not so with disc sports. As you look over the years there from 74 to 82, you can see that there were lots of changes. I mean, the introduction of DDC, the introduction of Discathon, changes back and forth on how to work SCF, you know, how do you combine throw, run, and catch and MTA. All of those were really fun things to develop and not easy. I mean, when we introduced DDC, Jim Powers in Philly and Jim Palmieri in Rochester, New York, those were the 2 people who agreed that it was a good idea. Every other reasonable person said, oh, Stork, no. Don't, you got a good thing. Don't force this game. We don't even know exactly what it is. Make it an experimental thing. Let people try it for a couple of years and see if they like it. And I said, if it isn't for points, people aren't going to take it seriously. They're not going to even address it, because you got to remember, well, you remember, but some listeners might not be born. There was a mania to get to this event. I mean, those points to get to this event. I mean, people traveled. I mean, you couldn't do it these days. There aren't enough VW microvans. I mean, people toured and went to these events and scrambled and trained to get the points. And so when you put another event in there, people might have had an initial resistance, Rick LeBeau, where they said, oh, I don't think this is going to be any good. But once they addressed it, then I was generally gratified to find, and DDC is a good example. It had such a small amount of acceptance, and it was one of the 2 events in AFDO. You were saying that Kirkland's still railing about how close he came to getting the car, and I know, well, I mean, he's got a Tesla now. What's the big problem? It was just Dotson, you know. So anyway, the 2 events at AFDO were DDC and golf, and it's true, I won golf by a lot, but it was an ordinated scoring. So second place was just down 1 point. Didn't matter how big the margin was. And so then we moved over to DDC, which was new to everybody. Palmieri had essentially invented it for his club. They played a number of championships over the years, the club championship, but it was singles for one, and the courts were very close together. Why? Because that's as far as Palmieri could throw. You know, he thought, well, just, 15 feet or whatever it was over there. It was essentially a juggling game. And Kirkland's a fantastic juggler, along with many other things. That's one of the reasons I didn't want to follow him. I mean, I thought when I saw you were interviewing Kirkland first, I thought, man, I'm not coming on. I'm waiting months until I come on. The guy's got independent control of his eyebrows. I mean, so it was a juggling game. And so when we introduced it into WFC into the NAS meets and WFC, it required some work. I mean, it took a whole winter to morph it into a doubles game.
Mm-hmm.
We played almost every night of the week over at Arcadia Park under the lights, trying to work it out. You know, how can we get it that work? Because it's a real game design challenge. It doesn't flow like tennis. The ball doesn't just rebound off of the racket. How do we keep it flowing? And so,
and let me just explain, my viewers, you're talking about the winter of 1977-78. It became an NAS event in 78.
And when I think the first time that it rolled out was at Irvine, and we had to make, I remember Al and I sat down right after it and had a list of like 4 things that were obviously broken. I mean, you could, if the 2 teams didn't agree that they wanted to throw, it was an impasse and you start again. And that happened frequently. So they throw, they don't like the position, they stop, start again. If you caught the disc, you could run to the front of the court. Mm-hmm. You didn't stay in your position, you run to the front of the court. We're playing with 119s. You know, there was a bunch of stuff that needed to be changed, like the designation rule and all of those things had to be changed. And that was big fun. I mean, can you imagine how much fun that was? Yes. I mean, a situation where you could change it. And again, love out to players, because all in all, they were amazingly accepting of going, you know, it would be easy for them to go, come on, man, I got my game working where I'm running to the front of the court and I'm doing really bad. Now you tell me I have to stay in a pivot, you know. So anyway, it was great fun to introduce that kind of thing. And then later Discathon. I mean, if you want something to make people not like you, tell them they have to run. And I felt that the complex of events didn't have enough endurance in it. It had the sprinting with self-caught, right? And so that was covered. It had the power events with distance and self-caught. Accuracy obviously was really important, but we didn't have anything that required aerobic fitness, because of course ultimate wasn't involved in the individual overall. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to appeal to those ultimate players who were fit in that way. But the introduction of Discathon, which is inspired by a trip to Belgium. I made a trip with the Ron Kaufman tour to Belgium and for golf. And one of the events that they had at the Big Belgian Open was speed golf. Mm. And the speed golf, which was great fun. You just played the round. It's executive golf. You know, only got 15 minutes, you know, play, and you're done. You put in each basket, you threw over to the next tee, and bang, bang, bang. And that had its issues. And again, we worked on it pretty hard, mostly at Lacey Park in San Marino. And my initial thought was that you wanted to count the throws and the time. So you've got these 2 things. And so now you need some little minion to run along with his or her counter and count the throw. So after about 2 days of that, I said, forget it. That's not happening. We're just going to finish. Yeah. Because the other advantage is you want people to know what happened. I don't know if you ever watch like the Paralympics, Winter Paralympics, where people have different degrees of limitation. And that's all factored in a very, very complex calculus. So they come over the cross-country line, boom, boom, boom. Some people, you know, have one sort of limitation, other people's have another. And so they finish, and then 45 minutes later, they release the results because they've now gone through and figured it out. We didn't want that. We wanted you to know who won. And so it was
the guy who crossed the finish line first turns out he's in 5th place. What's that, you know?
Exactly. And Discathon and its acceptance was really exciting. And I mean, a couple of years in the golden years of Discathon, when you've got those super top people, you know, Carlos Rio and Leonard Muse and Tony Pelican and LeBeau and I mean, where at the beginning of one of those events, you go, God, who can win this thing? You know, different techniques that they had. And I mean, I honestly believe still that if discathon were promoted correctly, it could be huge. I mean, if you like anything about cross country, I mean, discathon is cross country
Right.
on acid. You know, I mean, it's just so much more exciting where the discs are coming over the shoulder of the leader, and the finish, the people from behind have the chance to them at the final thing. I mean, we had so many discathon finishes that were just some of the most exciting things that I've seen in sports. And I'm a Laker, you know, so I've seen some exciting things.
Dan, 1982 WFC seemed like it was a little different. I mean, you did bring in discathon. Is there anything else you want to mention about how that year kind of evolved?
You know, that year was a tremendous challenge. The money was beginning to dry up. That just the management wasn't as enthused about these large promotions. I mean, you got to remember that it was really a miracle that WAMO was willing to tolerate the complexity and expense of the IFA program, all of the series meets, the World Championships, just in terms of, let's call it the messiness. It's messy. It's real easy to call up your media rep and put on a Saturday morning buy. And it's something that the trade understands. Hey, we're buying a 30-second spot on Saturday morning. It's going national. Make sure you've got product on the shelves. I mean, there's a metric where people can say, you can take it to the bank. This many eyeballs is going to see this ad, and they're going to come in. They're going to want to buy the Super Pro or the World Class disc. It's that explanation was a lot more difficult for me, of saying, hey, we're introducing discathon this year. You know, the trade doesn't know exactly what to make of that. Even though, you know, we did attempt at a lot of sales meeting, we attempt to have them, you know, experience the game, you know, to try those things. But they were tolerant for a long time. The thing to remember is that the companies, you know, are driven to make profit, of course, and so they're always looking at the different opportunities of how to best do that. And so the decision making of the company changes over time. You're not trying to convince the same single person of your idea, but there's kind of power flow. And so it turned out that the mood moved against this messier, more expensive promotion that we had been doing. And so 1982 was a dramatic adjustment of what we've been doing, from the many NAS meets down to 3, count them 3. Mm-hmm. It's only going to be 3: Sacramento, St. Louis, and Manassas. Just those 3. Well, you can imagine, to people who were used to having NAS meets in their region, that to find this out, that there were just 3, was a tremendous shock. And it was a shock to our system. But in my mind, it was the best opportunity within the budgetary limitations that we had. And we could see that was coming to an end, that this probably was going to be the last year that we could have any of those meets.
Well, and let's point out that those 3 events were week long, and they were overall. So they didn't have only 2 events; they had 6, and they were major events, very competitive.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, that was the compromise, that essentially we were saying, yes, we're not going to do the NAS meets, but there's going to be essentially 4 WFCs. That is the 2 qualifiers. So you'll get the full experience there, not at WFC, but you get the full experience. And then there'll be what we think is going to be an epic WFC at again a big change for us on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. Say, God, well, how can you, after we developed all of this infrastructure and technique for running WFCs on the West Coast, how do you move it to the East Coast? Well, you go back to Rutgers. And thank God, there I had my roots still deep there. Mm-hmm. And so it's a matter of picking up the phone to Jens and saying, hey, buddy, would you mind walking down to Johnson Park and see, can we still get a golf course in there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, Jens was really an important part of that, my boots on the ground and Gary and just other connections that I had. And they helped open the door to the connections at Rutgers, upgrade the golf course at the Douglas campus, et cetera, et cetera. Can we get the dorms? All of that. So it was really a kind of an interesting symbolic return to the roots of essentially now go back and do a supercharged octad.
Right.
So that really wrapped it up, and then introduced us to the new era, which was the U.S. Open era and the support of these growing specialty organizations from WAMO as a sponsor, as opposed to running it as IFA. Mm-hmm. Now, to support then UPA at the time and GPA and the Freestyle Association as a sponsor, more of an arm's length, because it was also the same time as moving to open competition of different discs rather than just Frisbee brand discs.
Let's go back to 1979 to the enormous WAMO $50,000 disc golf championship at Huntington Beach. Tell us what went into that, how you worked with Ed to bring that to fruition, and why didn't it continue?
Well, the first thing is I did very little on that event. That was almost exclusively Ed and DGA. The IFA had its fish to fry. We were working on the series and that sort of thing, and Ed didn't have that much direct involvement in that. He participated in it, but in the same way, Ed really worked with his contacts at WAMO management primarily to do the $50,000 tournament. I can take no credit for really any major part of that, other than offering the cooperation of IFA and our communication abilities. But all of the formatting, Ed and I may have had some conversations about the innovative prize money scheme, which you may recall, where as you qualified to later rounds, you paid in additional money to move ahead. So if you were in the prelims, there was an entry fee for that. But if you made the second round, then you had an additional entry fee, and all of that added up to produce the 50 grand. If you made the finals, then it cost you more. So it was really kind of a gambling scenario of, well, how confident are you? You're going into the second round in last. Do you continue to pay? Gambler's dilemma here. I'm gonna win it back. I'm gonna win it back, honey. I promise. It was an interesting thing, and part of the theory behind it was the very well-worn statement where we said, the world would pay more attention to this sports if we just had big prize money. That's what we need. We need big prize money. Look at other sports. They have big prize money. They're on TV. Ergo, big prize money. And so we said, well, let's experiment and see what happens with big prize money. So Ed manages to generate this big prize money in, what would be a kind of a standard event. There were events like that Huntington Beach event. They just didn't have 50 grand. 50 grand was the big news. That's what drew people to, let's say, not go to high school for the whole week, and come out to the West Coast. People like that. We got them so that they would make those decisions and not even go to college, that kind of thing. Right. So, and then that's all perfect, except for one thing. We didn't have any gasoline. And so then here comes this event, and Ed's going, well, is the press going to come down to see it? And Goldie Norton and Tony Fermi are saying they're really kind of reluctant because there's gas rationing, and they don't want to spend the gas to come down. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. Get a bus. I mean, we're going to bring them down in a bus, and we'll give them gas vouchers. I mean, it was a very interesting event. I mean, a monumental one in many ways. Mm-hmm. For me, sociologist that I am, it was the first time that I had seen a gallery that had the kind of electricity when those final holes were being played between TK and John Conley. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was the first time I had seen that electricity of, oh, let's get to a good position on the next tee. We want to be able to see this. I mean, mm-hmm. What's happened? And then probably the next chapter of that was your final with the boys at Rutgers in WFC 82. Mm-hmm. That huge gallery was the same kind of electricity. But the first time I had seen it, and I think that was true for a lot of people, where they said, this is something.
Well, Dan, thank you very much for your time. I hope everyone enjoys this interview. We are going to have to do another part here with you because your life has been so marvelous. We're going to cover from 1983 on in the next part. So let's wrap it up for today.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm glad they're going to chance to do it again, because I've got more shirts and I've got more, so